My ex-father-in-law took everything from me, but his business failed, and now he wants my support. I don't even know where to begin because this situation feels like something straight out of a bad soap opera, the kind you watch when there's nothing better to do. A few years ago, I thought I had my life figured out. I was in a serious relationship with Sarah, my girlfriend at the time, and I genuinely believed she was the woman I would spend the rest of my life with. We met in college, fell in love, made plans, and dreamed of a future together. What I didn't see coming, and boy, do I regret not seeing it, was the chaos that would come from being around her family, especially her father, Mr. Jenkins. To give you some context, Mr. Jenkins was a successful businessman, at least in appearance. From the very beginning, he made me feel like part of his world. When Sarah and I got engaged, he offered me a position in his family business. It was a decent job, with good pay and room for growth. At first, I felt lucky because opportunities like that don't come every day. But things started to change. I don't know if it was his management style or just his personality, but he always gave off the impression that if you didn't do things his way, you were out. I wanted his approval. I wanted to prove that I was capable and that I wasn't with his daughter for personal gain. So, I worked hard, really hard. Everything seemed to be going well until he asked me to sign some documents. He told me it was just a formality, a way to streamline the legal side of a project we were handling. And like an idiot, I didn't even stop to read them carefully. I mean, who questions their soon-to-be father-in-law? Spoiler alert, those documents were a trap. I found out soon after, when my relationship with Sarah began to fall apart. It turned out that the love of my life wasn't as perfect as I had thought. She was cheating on me. But that wasn't even the worst part. When we broke up, her father took full advantage of the situation to destroy me. Suddenly, everything I had worked for in the company vanished. Mr. Jenkins used those damn documents I had signed to place financial burdens on me that I didn't even understand. He took my car, drained my savings, and even claimed the furniture I had bought when Sarah and I lived together. It was as if my entire life had been stripped away in one fell swoop. I tried to fight back, but he was powerful. He had lawyers, connections, and influence. And me? I was just a regular guy who had trusted the wrong people. To make things worse, Sarah started spreading rumors about me, saying I was toxic, ungrateful, and not at her level. I lost friends, connections, and for a while, even the hope of getting back on my feet. But I learned to take care of myself and, more importantly, not to trust anyone so blindly again. And just when I thought that chapter of my life was closed, Mr. Jenkins reappeared, this time not with his usual arrogance, but with a plea for help. His business is in ruins. His partners abandoned him. And now, for reasons I still don't understand, he thinks I'm the right person to help him. He called me, and though my first instinct was to laugh, I can't deny that something in me stirred. Who does this? Who ruins your life and then shows up begging for help? Update 1. It's been 3 days since I posted this, and honestly, I didn't expect things to escalate so quickly. But of course, with someone like Mr. Jenkins in my life, the drama never ends. The guy called me, yes, directly. I don't even know how he got my number since I changed it after everything that happened with Sarah and her family. But there it was, his name on my screen. And even though every instinct in me screamed, don't answer. Leave it on read and move on with your life, I guess part of me wanted to hear him grovel, or at least understand how serious his situation really was. The conversation was awkward. His tone was completely different from what I remembered. Mr. Jenkins always spoke in a way that made you feel beneath him, but this time, he sounded humble, even nervous. After some forced small talk, he finally dropped the bombshell. I know this might not be the best time, but I need your help. There was an awkward silence. Because honestly, how do you even respond to that? I barely managed to say, help with what, exactly? That's when he started explaining that his business was in the red. Apparently, the company had faced problems ever since I left, since he threw me out. He admitted to making rash decisions, his partners had let him down, and the company was on the brink of collapse. And then, in words that genuinely shocked me, he said, "You were always the only one who truly understood my vision." And here's the part that really messed with my head. Before hanging up, he said something that left me spinning. I know I made mistakes with you, but there are things you don't know. I pressed him for details, but he quickly changed the subject and ended the call, saying he hoped I would think it over. When I hung up, I was confused and, to be honest, a little angry. What the hell did he mean by things I don't know? Part of me thinks he's just playing with my curiosity. But another part, one that hasn't fully moved on from the damage he caused, wants answers. I knew the call from Mr. Jenkins wasn't going to be the end of this. But what I definitely didn't expect was that Sarah would also show up in my life again. Because of course, this wouldn't be a complete disaster if my ex didn't make an appearance too. It's been a couple of weeks since my meeting with Sarah. After that conversation, I decided to take some time to process everything. I ignored the calls from Mr. Jenkins and the messages from Sarah because I honestly didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to put it all behind me, but another part couldn't stop thinking about those words. There are things you don't know. If he inflated those debts on purpose, I'm not going to lie, it was eating away at me. The curiosity was killing me. After overthinking it for far too long, and with Mr. Jenkins persistently bombarding me with calls and emails, I finally agreed to a meeting. Not because I wanted to help him, but because I felt I deserved some answers. We met in his office, which, to my surprise, was completely desolate. It wasn't even a shadow of what I remembered. The walls were bare, the desks abandoned, and even the lights seemed dimmer. Mr. Jenkins greeted me with a nervous smile, far from the overbearing man he once was. He looked tired, even defeated, after a few minutes of small talk. Because, apparently, he still felt the need to pretend courtesy, he got straight to the point. He told me the company was on the brink of bankruptcy and that he had tried everything possible to save it, but nothing was working. According to him, he had lost the confidence of his partners, and the banks no longer wanted to finance him. He was completely cornered. "I need you to help me get out of this," he said, looking at me as if he was offering me some golden deal. I almost laughed in his face. The guy who ruined me needed me? But I held back, I wanted to know more. I asked him why he thought I would help him after everything he did to me. And that's when he dropped something that made me freeze. "I know I made mistakes with you, but I want to make it up to you. There's something I found out about those papers you signed. We can cancel that debt." I stared at him, trying to read between the lines. Cancel the debt? After years of suffering from the consequences of his manipulation? I asked him to be clearer, and that's when he confessed that there were legal irregularities in the contracts. In other words, he had known from the beginning that the documents were a mess. But now, he was willing to use that fact as leverage. "If you help me, I'll make it all go away. We could even check to see if there's anything you can get back," he added. And then came the kicker. He also offered me a percentage of the shares if I agreed to return to the company to help restructure it. This wasn't just a desperate plea. This was a calculated move. Mr. Jenkins hadn't changed. He was still a manipulative strategist, trying to use whatever means necessary to stay afloat. But at the same time, it left me wondering, how bad did things have to be for him to swallow his pride and offer me a piece of the business? I told him I needed time to think about it. Not because I wanted to help him, but because I was beginning to see this as an opportunity. An opportunity to understand everything that really happened back then, and maybe even to get back some of what he took from me. Walking out of that office, I felt strange. It was like seeing a wounded lion trying to convince me he still had fangs. Now, I have so many questions. Just how real were those irregularities in the papers? And what is Mr. Jenkins still hiding? Something tells me he hasn't told me everything. I'm going to talk to a lawyer before making any decisions. I refuse to fall into another one of his traps. But at the same time, I can't help but think, maybe this is my chance to turn everything around. A week has passed since my meeting with Mr. Jenkins. In that time, I followed my gut and sought out a lawyer, someone who could review those documents I signed years ago. It took me a while to dig them out. Not just because they were physically buried in some forgotten corner of my apartment, but because emotionally, opening those boxes felt like reopening old wounds. Luckily, I found someone recommended by a friend, a lawyer specializing in corporate contracts. Let's call him Dave. When I explained my situation, his reaction was a mix of surprise and indignation. I handed over all the documents and asked him to be brutally honest. Was there any way I could use them in my favor? A few days passed. Then I got a call from Dave. When I arrived at his office, his expression spoke louder than words. He showed me the documents and pointed out several glaring irregularities, contradictory clauses, duplicated signatures, and, most importantly, provisions that were outright illegal. "This is a mess," he said, clearly astonished. "If you had taken this to court back then, not only could you have voided everything, but you probably could have sued him for fraud." That last word, fraud, hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew Mr. Jenkins had played dirty, but hearing a professional confirm it stirred up two emotions in me at once: a burning rage for having been so naive and a small spark of hope. I asked Dave if I could still take action after all this time. He didn't give me a definitive answer, but he said there were possibilities. However, he made one thing clear: if I pursued this, it would be a long and costly battle. "You need to decide if it's worth it," he told me. "Because from what I see, he's using this situation to manipulate you again." Then Dave asked me something I hadn't considered before. "Why does he think you are so important to saving his business? What are you overlooking?" That question left me reeling. Because honestly, it made no sense. Why would Mr. Jenkins want me back so badly? Why would he offer to wipe out my debt and give me shares of the company? Something didn't add up. That same night, I received another message from Sarah. It was short but direct. "My dad wants to see you again. He says he's ready to tell you everything. Please don't ignore him." I don't know if it was her desperate tone or the fact that I was already knee-deep in this mess, but I agreed. I met Mr. Jenkins at a discreet restaurant. When I arrived, he was already waiting with a folder on the table. He wasted no time. "When you signed those papers, it wasn't just about protecting the business," he admitted. "There were other people involved, partners who didn't want you to have too much influence. It was a rushed decision, but now I know it was a mistake." I asked him directly if that meant I had been used as a scapegoat to cover up bigger debts or problems. And although he tried to sugarcoat it, he finally admitted it. "They turned you into a kind of insurance, to appease certain partners who didn't trust you." And then came the darkest revelation. Those partners weren't just out of the company now, they were responsible for part of its current collapse. And apparently, some of them were demanding payback. At that moment, everything clicked. Mr. Jenkins wasn't just asking for my help to save his business. He was asking because he believed I could somehow handle the mess he had created. I don't know whether to feel more furious or impressed by his audacity. But one thing is clear: he still isn't telling me everything. And now, I need to find out the truth before I get dragged even deeper into this mess. After receiving that anonymous call, I was on high alert. I started noticing things I normally wouldn't have. A car that seemed to be following me, messages in my mailbox with no sender, and the constant feeling of being watched. I won't lie, I was paranoid. Dave, my lawyer, recommended that I take immediate action. "We need proof of everything that is going on," he said. "If this escalates, we need something solid to back up your version of events." So, I installed cameras in my apartment and started keeping a detailed log of every interaction I had with Mr. Jenkins, Sarah, or anyone else involved. I also hired a private investigator, recommended by Dave, to dig deeper into Arthur's activities. I knew I couldn't confront him directly without first understanding exactly what he was capable of. Meanwhile, Mr. Jenkins kept insisting that we meet. His desperation was almost childlike, as if he was grasping for attention. Finally, I agreed to one last meeting on the condition that I would secretly record everything he said. We met in a small office he had rented because, as he explained, he had to close his previous office due to financial struggles. When I arrived, Mr. Jenkins was more nervous than I had ever seen him. His usual superiority was gone. Before I could even sit down, he started talking. "Arthur found out I contacted you," he blurted. "I didn't mean to get you in trouble, but you have to understand something. He doesn't just want money. He wants to make sure no one can take him down." I asked him to be direct. I was done with detours. That's when he handed me a document, a new contract that would make me a financial mediator between the company and Arthur. It included vague promises of settling my old debt and awarding me a percentage of shares in return. I laughed. I laughed in his face. "Do you really expect me to sign this after everything that's happened?" I asked. And that's when his facade finally broke. "This isn't just about me," he said, nearly begging. "Arthur doesn't trust me anymore, but he thinks you can calm the waters. If I don't sign this agreement, I'll lose everything. And if you don't sign it, he'll come for you anyway." At that moment, I understood exactly what Mr. Jenkins was doing. He was using me as his last line of defense. Not only did he want me to take responsibility for his mess, but he also wanted to put me directly in Arthur's crosshairs. Though part of me wanted to tell him to go to hell, I knew I had to keep my cool. "I'm not signing anything without my lawyer reviewing it first," I told him. That seemed to calm him down, slightly. But something in his expression told me he wasn't done playing all his cards. Meanwhile, my private investigator finally brought me some solid information about Arthur. It turns out Arthur was already dealing with legal troubles due to shady business dealings in other cities. Although I couldn't confirm anything, it seemed likely that he was using this conflict with Mr. Jenkins to generate quick cash to cover his own problems. The worst part? Arthur had been investigating me as well. According to my investigator, Arthur had attempted to access records related to me, looking for something he could use as leverage. That would explain the anonymous call and the paranoia I had been living with. It was then that I made my decision. I had to confront Arthur, but on my terms. I coordinated with Dave to build a legal strategy to protect myself while preparing a counterattack. I knew I couldn't take Arthur down directly, but if I played my cards right, I could dismantle his influence over Mr. Jenkins and, hopefully, recover what had been taken from me. As all of this was unfolding, I received a text from Sarah that same night. "Please don't do anything impulsive. There are things you don't know about my dad and Arthur. If you want answers, I need to see you one more time." I was physically and mentally exhausted. Every step I took seemed to reveal a new layer of this mess. And even though I wanted out, I knew I was in too deep to back down now. Final update. This is not what I expected to write. Everything has taken such a strange and tragic turn that I'm still processing what happened. After my last conversation with Sarah, I was determined to meet with her and get the answers I needed. But that meeting never happened. One morning, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a police officer. At first, I thought it had something to do with Arthur or the threats I had been receiving, but what I was told left me speechless. Mr. Jenkins had been found dead in his office. According to the officer, an employee in the building had discovered the body. It appeared that Mr. Jenkins had been working late, something he had been doing a lot lately. He was found sitting in his chair, with a gunshot wound to the head and a gun in his hand. Everything initially pointed to suicide. But it wasn't long before questions started to arise. The police found inconsistencies, the position of the gun, the fingerprints, and even traces of a struggle in the office. Soon, it became clear, this was not a suicide. Mr. Jenkins had been murdered. Rumors spread like wildfire, and all fingers pointed to one person, Arthur Beltran. The police quickly found enough reason to arrest Arthur. His connection to Mr. Jenkins, his history of threats, and recent disputes over debt made him the prime suspect. They even uncovered messages between him and Mr. Jenkins, showing a growing tension between them. Although there was no direct evidence, the case against Arthur seemed strong, at least on paper. When I heard about Arthur's arrest, I felt conflicted. Part of me was relieved that he was out of the picture. But another part couldn't shake the feeling that this was too convenient. Would Arthur really have been so reckless as to leave such an obvious trail? Or was someone else pulling the strings? Sarah, on the other hand, went completely silent. She didn't answer my calls or messages, which was unusual. Finally, a week after Mr. Jenkins' death, she contacted me. We met in a cafe, and the first thing I noticed was how much she had changed. She seemed colder, more calculating. "My dad ruined a lot of things," she said, "but I'm not going to let it end like this. There are no more debts to Arthur. Everything is under control." That last part sent a chill down my spine. "No more debts to Arthur?" I asked. "How?" She avoided my question, only offering a vague response. "Things are no longer a problem for anyone. Trust me." When I directly asked if she believed Arthur had killed Mr. Jenkins, her response was even more disturbing. Does it matter? The truth won't change anything now. That sentence alone left me with more questions than answers. Something about her demeanor, her words, and her overall presence made me feel like she knew far more than she was letting on. Since then, things have calmed down. Arthur remains in custody as the investigation continues, but so far, there has been no conclusive evidence against him. Meanwhile, Sarah has taken full control of the company, reviving it from the ashes. She even offered me a deal to make up for all that I lost. I'm still considering it, but I can't stop wondering what really happened that night in Mr. Jenkins' office. Was it Arthur, desperate for money? Or was it someone else, someone who had just as much to gain? The truth is, I may never know. Mr. Jenkins wasn't an easy man to like, but no one deserves to end up like that. And even though everything seems to have come to an end, I can't shake the feeling that this story still has loose threads. Maybe I'll never know the full truth.